Two pilots flying into Reagan National Airport could not reach the control tower Wednesday morning. They landed with no problem, but there are unconfirmed reports that the one guy on duty in the tower was sleeping. But joining me, air safety expert Scott Wallace. He is the former director of accident investigations for the FAA. And Scott, a lot of people shaking their heads today when they hear this story. If you were one of those passengers on either one of those planes that came in and found out there was no one in the control tower to help out the pilot, would you be worried?
I wouldn't be worried. Clearly, procedurally, something went wrong here, and the investigators will get to the bottom of that. But 90% of the airports in the country don't have control towers. Many airports have part-time control towers. So what the pilot did at the instruction of the radar controller, the prior controller he was talking to, was treat it as an airport where the control tower either had closed and landed. The risk to the passengers here was very, very low. Negligible.
Why do you say that? I mean, because we would assume that the control tower, the guy in the control tower would help both of those pilots know that the runways were clear, that it was safe to land.
That's correct, but the pilots fly into uncontrolled. There are probably between 100 and 200 airports in this country that are served by air carriers that do not have control towers. So there are procedures to do that, and they're done safely every day.
Explain to us, help us understand that, because this is not just any airport. This is Reagan National. It's 4 miles from the White House. I mean, it's a very busy airport and a really important place.
Well, you're absolutely right. It's a very special airport. It's right next to some of the most strictly prohibited airspace in the country. I think there are special procedures for high-speed communication to the Secret Service and whatever else. And so it is a highly sensitive airport. But to say it's busy at some times of the day, but it's definitely not busy after midnight. It's very slow.
Okay, so help us understand this, because I travel in and out of Reagan all the time here. I've taken those late flights, and I understand that even if the pilot understands that the runways are clear for the most part, there's not a lot of traffic, during that time you have maintenance crews that are towing planes, there are people on the ground. I mean, how would a pilot possibly know what was taking place on the ground if he doesn't have communication with somebody in the control tower?
Well, I would point out, I think we had good visual flying conditions. The airliner coming in has got strobe lights and landing lights, and it's making noise. And so, and the likelihood at Reagan, of course, of an airplane being towed across that runway is extremely remote. There's really no reason to have any airplanes normally on the riverside of the runway, assuming they're landing on the main north-south runway there. So, I mean, something went wrong. The investigators will get to the bottom of that. There'll be corrective measures. The risk here was really very low.
Why is it acceptable? I mean, the Secretary of Transportation, Ray LaHood, says this was not a good idea, that you have to have at least 2 people in the tower. Why is it acceptable to just have one? Is that typical?
Well, I would go back to the point that 90% of the airports in the country have no towers at all, and it's largely dictated by traffic counts. And so after midnight, departures are about 0 and arrivals are very few. So staffing levels are done typically based on traffic counts. But, the Secretary has made a decision. I'm not questioning that he will require 2 controllers in that tower.
There's some statistics as well that there's been an increase, 51% increase in error from these air traffic controllers. I assume that, there are times when they have to leave the tower and go to the bathroom, or perhaps they haven't gotten enough sleep. Do you have a sense of why this is taking place?
I think that the errors you're talking about that are much reported are these violations of the separation criteria, where airplanes get closer together than they should. And it's important to figure into the equation the fact that the FAA now has set up a system that really encourages reporting of errors, and the controllers and the whole are much less likely to hide them. So I'm not sure that the increase in the count reflects much more than the fact that they're being much more thoroughly reported. And many of these are just minor, 2.8 miles would ought to be 3 or something like that. That's not to say that they aren't all being investigated. They certainly are, but the system is just incredibly safe overall. And
I want to follow up real quickly, because you had said that there's some visuals. There's not a lot of traffic during that time, around midnight or so you know that there may be just 1 or 2 planes that are coming in around that time. If the weather was poor, if you had poor visibility, would the pilot land under those conditions, or would he have to, in fact, be talking to somebody in a control tower to know what was taking place on the ground?
Well, you can shoot an instrument approach with a very precise guidance system into an uncontrolled airport. So that's possible, but I think that would have altered what happened here in all likelihood, because the tower, the pilots, they made a judgment based on all of the conditions, and the weather was certainly very good. And if the weather had been challenging, they might have done something else.
All right, Scott Wallace, we appreciate your perspective and your expertise on this. I know a lot of people looking at this situation and very surprised to find that no one was in that tower, and that there are so many airports that don't have air traffic controllers in those towers during those times. Thank you very much, Scott.